各位觀眾，今日我哋呢一套片咧要講嘅就係若望保祿二世呢一位教宗嘅生平。大家都知道咧，若望保祿二世係波蘭人。佢喺做教宗之前咧，實際上咧佢有30年生活喺共產黨統治底下嘅經驗。波蘭喺40年代末，即係話第二次世界大戰結束咗之後咧，就由呢一個波蘭統一工人黨所統治，實際上即係共產黨。而共產黨咧就面對一個好大嘅問題。因為波蘭人裏邊咧有90%係天主教徒，對天主教會嚟講咧，亦都係一個好大嘅問題。因為咧佢哋要生活喺呢一個無神論嘅共產黨底下，佢哋點樣去協調彼此之間嘅矛盾咧？咁樣樣，好啦，喺當時嘅教會嚟講咧，實際上係存在住唔同嘅意見嘅。譬如話，波蘭天主教會嘅第一號人物就係維新斯基大主教。喺呢套片裏邊咧，我哋都有佢嘅一個黑白嘅片段，喺一個群眾集會上邊咧，佢係畫十字嘅。好啦，維新斯基就認為咧，就係天主教會冇辦法，因為我哋要生活喺共產黨嘅統治底下，我哋一定要想辦法同佢妥協，我哋要忍辱負重。但係另外一個教會嘅重要人物咧，就係今日嘅若望保祿二世，當時佢係波蘭嘅教會裏邊第2號嘅人物，佢就認為咧，就係話我哋一定要想辦法去睇下社會上邊不公正、不正義或者係不平等嘅來源。而如果呢啲不公正、不正義、不平等嘅來源係恰恰就係統治者係共產黨嘅話咧，咁就一定要想辦法同佢鬥爭。咁所以教會裏邊咧，實際上係存在住一個妥協派，或者係一個自由派，或者係即係希望對住呢啲不公正、不正義嘅來源咧作鬥爭嘅呢一個咁嘅派別。咁啊，為咗去説明一下當時教會面對嘅困境咧，其實可以講一個小故事嘅。就喺55年或者係56年嘅時候咧，有一次咧，波蘭嘅大主教有一個群眾嘅集會，佢企喺當時教堂嘅即係上邊一個面對住廣場嘅一個窗口嗰度，然後咧希望咧就係發表演說。廣場上面咧就企咗數以萬計嘅人，但係一方面咧就係共產黨唔能夠阻止佢發言啊，因為你冇辦法嘅。但另一方面咧，教會想發言，但係共產黨咧就唔希望佢發揮太大嘅影響。於是咧，當時嘅統治者咧就規定就係話你可以發言，但係你唔可以用咪。嗱，結果咧就係話呢個主教對住幾十萬人咧，實際上佢係發揮唔到任何嘅作用，因為佢講嘢冇人可以聽到嘅。嗱，面對住呢幾十年嘅嗰個鬥爭經驗咧，若望保祿二世咧，實際上佢係即係做咗好多嘢。而事實上，佢除咗一個神職人員之外咧，佢亦都係一間大學 Cracovia 大學嘅哲學教授。佢喺做教宗之前咧，已經寫過5本書，寫咗咧70幾篇文章，對好多問題嚇，無論係神學、哲學嘅問題咧，都有好深刻嘅見解。嗱，所以咧就係以一個咁嘅身份即係一方面係教宗，另外一方面實際上係一個知識分子，以咁嘅身份去即係去領導全世界天主教會嘅發展咧，自然咧喺佢由1979年之後呢幾十年裏邊咧，喺即係促進呢個社會進步或者係全球嘅變革嗰度咧，係發揮咗好重要嘅角色。跟住落嚟咧，我哋咧就會睇到好多片段，呢啲片段咧都係喺88年所拍攝嘅。而1988年咧係象徵住若望保祿二世做教宗咧係做咗10年。咁喺過去10年裏邊咧，佢做咗好多工作，而咧個成果咧係開始體現到出嚟啦。咁第一個成果咧可以睇到嘅就係點咧？就係話蘇聯東歐嘅變革。其實88年咧可以講話係預見住呢個變革嘅開始啊。咁所以咧，我哋喺圖片裏邊咧，首先睇到嘅就係戈爾巴喬夫。戈爾巴喬夫喺85年上台，經過3年嘅努力，佢希望咧嗰個國家係更加民主。佢希望咧就係採取一連串嘅變革，同埋咧增強政府嘅嗰個透明度。嗱，喺88年嘅時候咧，可以講話咧就係民主化已經係去到一個即係差唔多水到渠成嘅階段。而事實上，除咗匈牙利88年嘅選舉之外咧，更加重要嘅就係話蘇聯自己喺89年嘅時候咧有總統選舉，呢個就係第一次。總統選舉意味住就係話國家嘅最高領導人咧係由全民普選產生嘅。嗱，我哋大家都知道咧，就係教宗若望保祿二世喺促進東歐嘅變革嗰方面咧起到好重要嘅作用。但喺88年咧，佢亦都訪問咗好多南美嘅國家，因為南美國家有好多暴虐嘅政權，佢希望做一啲功夫。佢亦都訪問咗非洲嘅某一啲國家，南非嘅種族隔離政策咧係令佢即係非常之反感嘅。 佢亦都委任咗巴勒斯坦嘅大主教，同埋咧佢亦都希望咧就係話喺教會嘅嗰個即係推動精神建設嗰方面咧，係扮演一個更加重要嘅角色。
In the history of John Paul II's time in office, 1988 has two different facets that seem to clash with each other. On the one hand, it marks the completion of his 10th year as Bishop of Rome and Universal Pastor, an occasion that prompted the mass media to make initial assessments of a period in office that had changed the style of the pontificate itself. But the 10th year, 1988, was also charged with a sense of anticipation. The world awaited events in Eastern Europe and in world politics which for decades had been locked in the balance of terror between the two nuclear superpowers. The anticipation was prompted by perestroika and its champion, Mikhail Gorbachev. The Pope from the East waited for the changes taking place in the USSR to bring forth the fruit of his 10-year seminal period, fostering a yearning for freedom and civil rights among peoples crushed by communist imperialism. The symbolic images of this second aspect of 1988 are the ceremonies in which Soviet officialdom marked a millennium of Christianity in Russia and the meeting between Kasaroli and Gorbachev at the Kremlin. 1988 saw the events that led to the fall of the Berlin Wall, to the conclusion of the Yalta era in Europe, and to the lowering of the Soviet flag. 5 innovations illustrate Wojtyła's style. First and foremost, his Eastern origins, as the first non-Italian pope for 455 years, which had the effect of making the Church less Western and of moving its center of gravity towards the East, opening a new religious and cultural outlook.
The Church needs both lungs to breathe, the Western lung and the Eastern one.
Secondly, Karol Wojtyła transformed the papacy into a global traveling mission. The papal chair gave way to the Pope-mobile. In 10 years, he kissed the earth of 73 countries. He spent almost a quarter of his time traveling or preparing for his missions. The third major Wojtyła change consisted of new ways of overcoming religious hurdles. The Day of Prayer at Assisi, with representatives of 9 world religions, remains a turning point in the history of the century. The fourth aspect, highlighted in summaries of the decade, is his defense of human rights. This has been the main achievement of his time in office. That assessment comes from André Froissart, the French academic who has been his confidant, just as Jean Guiton was for Paul VI, and Froissart has asserted it without a shadow of doubt.
Absolute defense of mankind as an image of God, wherever threatened by totalitarianism or by genetic and psychological manipulation. This is the commitment that the Pope has relentlessly given.
The last innovation, but not the least in terms of style, is that Wojtyła has also been the first Pope to retain some aspects of normal life, while nonetheless keeping a clear view of the sacredness of his role. In his audience with 3,500 fellow countrymen on 16th October, it was John Paul II himself who recalled what had happened in the Sistine Chapel 10 years earlier.
At the moment when the conclave was about to reach a decision, Cardinal Wyszynski said, "If they elect you, I beg you not to refuse." These words were a great help to me at that moment, because I was able to reply in a spirit of service to Christ and in a spirit of total faith in the Virgin.
From the 7th to the 18th of May, John Paul II made his 9th pilgrimage in 9.5 years to see the misery and injustice of Latin America, where his encyclical accusations were incontrovertible, visiting Uruguay, Bolivia, Paraguay and Lima. His stops in a fourth world area of Bolivia, amid the desperation of Indian miners and farm workers, were dramatic. Oruro, capital of the tin mining industry, was like a social incarnation of that country. Just a meter from the Pope, Juan Alberto Cartagena, wearing a miner's helmet, grabbed the microphone and with tears in his eyes shouted, "We are hungry and have nothing to eat," and then continued his brief tumultuous outburst by begging the Pope to bring about the reopening of the Kotavi mine where he had worked, and thanked him for his encyclicals on social matters and for having accepted liberation theology. In the presence of the bishops of Bolivia and Peru, John Paul II relaunched the Church's commitment to justice, keeping his ear attuned to the complaints of the poor.
Creemos en Dios Padre Santo.
Another dramatic, significant moment in the journey was a visit to Paraguay, which was on the point of being cancelled the day before because General Alfredo Stresna, who had ruled the continent's longest-lasting dictatorship since 1954, had tried to prevent the Pope from meeting opposition leaders. As well as the private meeting, the Pope participated for the first time in a fiery demonstration of opposition to the government that was openly and officially organized by the Church. Watched by the whole world, many in the crowd in the sports hall in Asunción tied a handkerchief over their mouths to show that they were gagged by the authorities. John Paul II, who did not hide his distaste for the lies of a dictator who acclaimed himself as a Catholic, suggested a return to constitutional and democratic normality as the road for rebuilding the new Paraguay. In Lima, his visit was accompanied by exceptional security measures. A number of Shining Path terrorists were discovered wearing disguise and heavily armed among the police force along the papal route. In a different context, and with other forms of poverty and violence in his sights, there was his journey in southern Africa, traveling through 4 black African countries bordering racist South Africa: Zimbabwe, Botswana, Swaziland and Mozambique, plus Lesotho, an enclave within it. His pastoral and social themes during this journey were numerous: famine, forced migration, ethnic conflicts and poor moral standards. But the main theme was his condemnation of apartheid, accompanied by his concern about what would follow it and his incessant appeal for non-violence. The Pope appealed to the Pretoria leaders to free Nelson Mandela. A thunderstorm at the airport of Maseru, capital of Lesotho, forced the Pope's aircraft to land in Johannesburg. In Mozambique, shaken by guerrilla strife and by tragic poverty and devastation caused by the civil war between Renamo and Frelimo, the Pope said he had seen the bleeding heart of the people. After his journey from the 23rd to the 27th June in connection with the crisis of Austrian Catholicism, which included his visit to the Nazi concentration camp of Mauthausen, the Pope held a discussion with the European Parliament in Strasbourg from the 8th to the 11th October 1988. At this meeting, John Paul II made an evangelical distinction between matters of state and those of God, and rejected 2 extremes, that of opposition to Christianity and religion, and that of Christian fundamentalism, neither of which offer solutions compatible with the Christian message and the spirit of Europe. Religion is a safeguard of liberty against forms of political messianism, religious fundamentalism, and various ideologies, he added in his address to the European parliamentarians. Christianity cannot be relegated to the private sphere. The Christian religion has an inspirational moral role and social effectiveness. With his incense prayer and Egyptian Coptic service at the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore on 14th August and a Mass in St. Peter's Basilica on the 15th, the Pope concluded a year dedicated to the Virgin that had begun on 6th June 1987. The service in St. Peter's ended with a prayer for lifting the threats that overshadow the entire human family, addressed to the Virgin Mary, under whose guardianship the threshold of the year 2000 and the outlook for the third millennium were placed. The year dedicated to the Virgin Mary ended with the apostolic letter Mulieris Voitila Dignitatem, on the issue of women's dignity. It was the first letter ever written by a pope on women's matters, and was significantly timed at the close of his first decade in office and the dawn of the second. In this second decade, the pontificate's task is to lead the people of God like a new Moses in their difficult transition at the end of the postmodern era. Speaking to bishops gathered for a general assembly, he gave 2 warnings to Italian Catholics. Do not dilute the Christian message by reducing it to a cultural proposition, and avoid divisions within the Church. His first call was addressed to those who support dialogue at any cost with other facets of our society, to the point of putting the Christian identity in danger. The second warning was addressed to certain ecclesiastical movements that were somewhat quarrelsome. In June, John Paul II made his longest pastoral visit to Italy, 5 days in Emilia, which Cardinal Biffi, Archbishop of Bologna, described as well-fed and desperate. The photo album of the travelling Pope, using various means of transport, was enriched by his remarkable trip through the crowd at the Fiorano motor racing track, standing in a Ferrari Mondial 8 Cabriolet. In Reggio Calabria, he brought to an end the National Eucharistic Congress, which had confronted the Italian Catholic conscience with the fact that there was a north-south issue even within the Church, with an associated backlog of misunderstandings and splits. The visit he made to Turin from the 2nd to the 4th of September and to places connected with Don Bosco on the centenary of his death aroused much interest in the newspapers. This was because of the Pope's call for the reconversion of Turin, home city of many great saints, especially during the 19th century, but also victim of diabolical temptations stemming from the world-pervading ideology of consumerism and hedonism. While the Intifada raged in the occupied territories of Gaza and the West Bank, the Palestinian Michel Sabah received his episcopal consecration in St. Peter's on the 6th of January as the new Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem.
Evangelium et verbum Dei predica in omnipatientia doctrina. Accipe annulum fidei signaculum et sponsam Dei sanctam ecclesia intemerata fide ornatus illibate custodi.
As a gesture of peace, representatives of the PLO, of Israel, and ambassadors of all Middle Eastern countries were invited to the Vatican Basilica. The difficult situation in Poland was a matter of constant concern for Karol Wojtyła. He called on many occasions for radical changes in the Polish system and in its methods, including such a message on Christmas Eve, addressed to his fellow countrymen. By the year's end, 1988 was seen to have been a year of no small hope, both in a religious context and as regards the international situation.
The Church's attention is focused on the challenges of our time.
This statement was made with humble pride by the Pope, who had come 10 years earlier from a far-off country. In the chronicles of his commitments during this eventful year of 1988, one episode that took place on the 3rd of January might seem less important: the dinner that John Paul II gave at the Santa Marta home at the Vatican for 130 poor people, recipients of help from the St. Peter's Society. That, however, was not the opinion of the Pope himself, who explained his view as he said farewell to his guests.
It is true that the Pope has many commitments, but I think that God will one day ask the Pope not whether he saw Minister so-and-so, Ambassador such and such, or Cardinal X, but will ask him whether he met, visited, and spoke with the poor.
教宗訪問南美洲呢啲咁專制、咁落後嘅國家呢，佢唔係淨係表示天主教會對呢啲國家嘅關懷，實際上佢更加關心嘅就係話喺呢啲國家裏邊呢，有兩個大嘅問題，一方面呢，就係經濟上嘅貧窮同埋飢餓啦，另一方面呢，就係社會不公同埋不平等不正義，所以實際上佢係希望藉住呢啲訪問呢，係推動呢啲國家喺個政權方面或者喺社會經濟方面呢，有連串嘅變革。事實上，佢喺巴拉圭 訪問嘅時候咧，甚至就係參加巴拉圭反對派佢哋嘅集會，藉住呢一樣嘢咧表達咧就係話佢哋對反對派嘅支持。咁所以咧就係話天主教會喺呢個時候咧，大家可以睇到啊，其實係相當之入世佢係非常之關心呢個社會不公或者係社會上面不正義嘅來源，然後希望咧喺呢一方面咧做一啲工作。同樣道理咧，佢去咗南部嘅非洲，佢訪問咗幾個國家，呢啲包括津巴布韋啦、Botswana 啦，仲有就係莫桑比克。佢藉住訪問呢啲國家咧，要表達嘅就係對南非種族隔離政策嘅不滿。當時嚟講咧，即係南非嘅人權領袖曼德拉咧，仲係被囚禁嘅。而教宗咧已經係公開呼籲南非政權咧係釋放曼德拉。咁呢個對於南非日後嘅變革咧，我相信咧係亦都起到一個非常之積極嘅作用。喺1988年咧，就係大家睇到社會主義開始搖搖欲墜啦。而事實上咧，喺89年咧，連蘇聯咧嘅總統選舉咧都係由全民普選產生嘅。呢個預示咗咧就係最終共產黨政權嘅崩潰。但係好多人咧以為咧就係社會主義嘅失敗就係資本主義嘅勝利。但係教宗喺1988年已經提出咗就係資本主義社會事實上存在住好多嚴重嘅問題。呢個包括咧就係貧窮啦，包括咧就係社會不公啦，同埋咧消費主義、享樂主義。所以咧就係話為咗即係表達佢對即係資本主義精神嘅嗰種批判。喺臨尾嘅片段咧，大家可以睇到佢特別咧邀請咗100幾十個窮人咧去食飯，佢遞飯餐俾佢哋食，同埋咧佢甚至咧就係講過一句説話，將來佢有機會見天主嘅時候咧，天主會有興趣問佢嘅，唔係話你見過啲咩達官貴人，天主有興趣問嘅就係你見過啲咩窮人，你同佢哋講過啲咩説話，你有冇幫過佢哋？從呢一方面咧可以睇到咧就係教宗咧係非常之關心社會上面存在住嘅種種問題，同埋希望對呢啲社會不公正不正義嘅事情呢，係做出即係一連串嘅工作。1989年呢，對全世界好多人嚟講呢，都可以講話係震撼人心嘅一年。中國人唔使問啦，因為呢一年呢有6·4事件，令到中國人呢係非常之感觸，甚至係悲嘆。對東歐同埋西歐嘅人嚟講呢，呢一年咧可以講話係非常之振奮啦，因為咧標誌住東西歐分裂嘅嗰個柏林圍牆咧喺呢一年咧就倒冧。從此以後咧，東歐嘅共產黨政權咧紛紛倒台，最終咧就係歐洲咧就成為一體。而今日咧翻轉頭嚟講咧，我哋大家都可以睇到就係呢10幾年來咧，東歐國家有好大嘅進步，而且咧喺今年咧就係有好多東歐國家咧係加入呢個歐洲經濟嘅共同體，即係歐洲聯盟。好啦，所以呢一套片呢，就係以戈爾巴喬夫為開始，以哈維爾即係當時啱啱當選嘅捷克總統哈維爾呢係結束嘅。戈爾巴喬夫喺呢套片一開始嘅時候呢，我哋大家睇到就係佢同教宗會面。呢個標誌住呢，就係蘇聯嘅改革嘅領袖，當時亦都係仲係蘇聯總統，願意呢同天主教會和解啦。其實大家都知道呢，就係教宗若望保祿二世喺促進東歐嘅變革，特別係波蘭變革嗰方面呢，係一個好大嘅精神力量，可以講話咧係扮演咗一個非常之重要嘅角色。同樣咧喺呢一年呢，若望保祿二世咧亦都接見咗波蘭團結工會嘅領袖華里莎。華里莎咧喺80年、81年嘅時候咧，成功地令到波蘭嘅團結工會咧成為一個合法嘅獨立嘅工會。呢個咧喺東歐嘅歷史上邊咧係破天荒嘅。因為佢哋從來咧都唔能夠接受一個唔係由共產黨領導嘅組織，特別係群眾組織咧，係可以咧就係存在。咁所以咧80、81年咧可以講話一個好大嘅突破，但係好遺憾咧喺81年嘅12月，團結工會咧就係被定性為呢個非法組織，華里莎咧從此以後咧就被軟禁。但竟然咧就到咗89年嘅時候咧，華里莎咧係被波蘭政府邀請咧出席一個圓桌會議。因為波蘭咧嗰個政權咧嗰陣時已經係岌岌可危，所以咧佢都係要求咧同團結工會咧就係合作，睇下點樣搞好呢一個國家。呢一個咧即係可以講話象徵住華里莎同埋團結工會嘅勝利，亦都係象徵住咧就係教宗若望保祿二世嘅勝利。因為教宗其實喺過去咁多年裏邊，無論係79年之前或者係79年之後咧，佢對波蘭嘅民主化咧都起到一個好重大嘅推動作用。喺呢一套片裏邊咧， 我哋仲發覺咧，就係我哋睇到好多第二次世界大戰嘅片段，因為1989年咧，恰恰就係第二次世界大戰爆發嘅50週年紀念。第二次世界大戰咧，對波蘭嚟講咧，尤其係慘痛嘅，因為波蘭人當時有2400萬人，但係咧竟然咧有1/4，即係600萬人咧，就係被納粹德國所屠殺。咁當然裏邊咧有好多波蘭人，亦都有好多咧係猶太人。嗱，咁所以咧成個第二次世界大戰咧，可以講話咧係令到成個歐洲生靈塗炭。呢一套片咧，當然咧就係即係一方面咧就藉住緬懷過去，希望咧就係歐洲唔好再生靈塗炭啦，唔好再打仗啦。另一方面咧就係希望咧就係話藉住呢一個即係柏林圍牆嘅倒冧咧，就係即係展望將來。嗱，呢兩個重點啊，即係東歐嘅變革同埋第二次世界大戰咧，可以講話係即係89年嘅事件嘅重點。但係伴隨住即係我哋之前啱啱所講嘅第二次世界大戰咧，其實喺呢一年裏邊咧，有另外一個國家係面對住一個非常之惡劣嘅境地，呢個就係黎巴嫩。所以我哋睇到咧，教宗咧喺個片裏邊咧係講咗好多嘢關於黎巴嫩。黎巴嫩實際上係夾喺以色列同埋敍利亞嘅衝突當中，佢差唔多咧就係被夷為廢墟。喺呢10幾年裏邊咧就冇好日子過。教宗咧係非常之憤怒。同時咧，教宗喺呢一年裏邊咧亦都訪問過非洲國家，佢嘅重點依然咧就係反對呢個種族隔離政策，因為教會咧係力行仁愛，佢哋當然咧唔能夠接受呢一個種族嘅歧視。同樣喺1989年咧，東帝汶同黎巴嫩一樣，都係面對戰爭嘅威脅。東帝汶咧喺獨立咗之後咧，係俾印尼兼併呢一樣嘢，梵蒂岡係從來都冇承認嘅。教宗若望保祿二世喺呢一年咧，甚至訪問東帝汶。咁當然佢訪問嘅時候咧，就會遇到一個好尷尬嘅問題，究竟佢係親吻定係唔親吻呢一塊土地呢？最後佢係用咗一個好聰明嘅辦法，就係親吻放喺呢一塊土地上邊嘅十字架。最後喺呢一套片裏邊咧，我哋睇到關於天主教會同其他基督教會和解嘅一啲片段。教宗若望保祿二世咧訪問咗北歐5個國家，而呢5個國家咧，大家都知道，從來咧天主教會都係冇乜太大嘅影響力，因為大部分嘅人咧，佢哋信奉嘅就係路德會信義宗。而呢一個教派咧，基本上就係對天主教會一直以嚟咧都係相當之仇視嘅。咁今次若望保祿二世咧就係主動向佢哋伸出友誼之手，甚至要求佢哋咧就係對天主教會過去所犯嘅錯誤咧係要求寬恕。最後大家可以睇到咧就係天主教會同埋英國嘅聖公會舉行嘅一啲共同嘅儀式，呢個象徵住咧合一運動嘅進一步發展。
Mikhail Gorbachev's rhythmic footsteps as he walked through the rooms of the Papal Palace on the morning of the 1st of December 1989 marked the last seconds before his great appointment with the Pope and with history. Then came his historic first handshake with the Slavic Pope, who had made the unprecedented gesture of coming some way to meet him, and the Soviet president's face relaxed in a smile. Their historic encounter came just after 11 o'clock. It was a meeting of high symbolic value, as if an impassable wall of non-communication and of aversion to spiritual values had been swept away. It is for this reason that Gorbachev's audience with the Pope captures the collective imagination in the same way as the fall of the Berlin Wall. Gorbachev himself would later recognize that without John Paul II, the events of 1989 in Europe would not have occurred. No pope, at least in modern times, had had the same political impact, and that impact came solely from the strength of his ministry, from his testimony to truth, a testimony that on the 13th of May 1981 had risked being silenced forever when Agca was given an assassin's weapon. This audience in the Vatican provides the symbolic image of the collapse of communism, a collapse that was political, social, and economic. In the private library, in the presence of an entourage of 24 people, including Soviet Foreign Minister Shevardnadze, the Pope spoke first.
Господин президент, мне чрезвычайно приятно иметь случай обратиться к вам.
Before the Kremlin leaders' audience, there had been a mass of changes in favor of the East European Church. These stemmed from the new line followed by Gorbachev, who had shaken up the communist regimes, prompting them to show greater openness towards the West. The reply to Gorbachev's line came from a Slavic pope who had never accepted the idea of Europe being split in two. Great changes that gave Karol Wojtyła hope and encouragement had come from Poland. Back in April, the success of the round table meetings between the government and the Free Trade Union had prompted the Vatican newspaper Osservatore Romano to write the headline, "Poland turns a new page." The Pope acknowledged this achievement by holding a second meeting with Lech Wałęsa, who had already received an audience in 1981. Wałęsa returned to the Vatican to thank his fellow countryman, the Pope, who had been the main author of the birth and success of Solidarność. 1989, the year of the turning point and the year of the Pope's sanctification of the reunification of Europe, came half a century after the outbreak of the Second World War. John Paul II transformed the anniversary into an important lesson, with an apostolic letter and a message to Polish bishops. 50 years had passed since the first act of war, the Nazi invasion of Poland and the defense of Danzig on the 1st of September 1939. Now the Pole who had become Pope sat beside the path of history, recalling before God the massacre of 55 million people, and felt it his duty to draw a lesson from the past, so that the causes that might reignite the conflagration would never again be repeated. Those causes were contempt for mankind and for nations, the totalitarian ideologies that half a century ago took the form of Nazi paganism and Marxist dogma. His lesson was addressed to Europe.
This continent has exported war. Now it is its turn to be the author of peace. It is a Europe that has not yet recovered from its injuries.
No aspect of this slaughter leaves a greater sense of horror than the extermination that was perpetrated by the Holocaust. 1989, year of the miracle of the East, was also the year of genocide in Lebanon. For 13 years, this country had been locked in a dreadful civil war that threatened its very existence. Never before had the Pope been seen to make 130 appeals, trying in every possible way to break through the international apathy that shrouded the tragedy of Lebanon. His most dramatic intervention was that of the 15th of August during the Angelus at Castel Gandolfo. Beirut had just been subjected to one of its most violent bombardments by Syria.
Dinanzi agli occhi di tutto il mondo si sta consumando un processo, direi di genocidio. Un processo che coinvolge la responsabilità dell'intera società internazionale. È il processo che sta portando alla distruzione del Libano. In realtà ci troviamo di fronte ad una minaccia per l'intero ordine della vita internazionale. È una minaccia di natura morale, tanto più dolorosa perché è uno Stato più debole che subisce la violenza o la indifferenza dei più forti. Difatti anche la vita internazionale, anche per la vita internazionale, vale il principio secondo cui non è lecito recare danno al più debole, non è lecito uccidere uno che è più debole.
To every everyone's surprise, and without regard for the risk, John Paul II announced that he wanted to visit Lebanon immediately.
Più di una volta ho desiderato di recarmi in Libano. Ogni giorno nella preghiera mi ritrovo in pellegrinaggio laggiù. Per quanto riguarda la mia presenza fisica nella regione, il ministero pastorale fra quei fratelli, sono stato consigliato di soprassedere per il momento a motivo della situazione. In questi giorni essa è ulteriormente peggiorata. Tuttavia, proprio adesso, ancora di più, sento l'interiore imperativo di recarmi in Libano. Prego affinché non mi vengano frapposte difficoltà nell'adempimento di questo ministero pastorale. Nel nome di Dio, mi rivolgo alle autorità siriane chiedendo di cessare i bombardamenti che mirano a distruggere la capitale del Libano e l'intero paese.
Southern Africa was the setting for the opening of his second decade in office, just as Latin America had been in January 1979. After an interval of barely 7 months, John Paul II returned to Africa for the 5th time at the end of April. Madagascar, Réunion, Zambia and Malawi were his destinations, carrying a banner of hope that apartheid might be brought to an end. Such hope had become tangible with the South African withdrawal from Namibia, even if this was gradual. It was precisely in Zambia, one of the most active anti-apartheid countries, that the Pope held a lively debate with the diplomatic corps.
Racism and its expression in systems of social, economic and political discrimination are regarded by the Church as absolutely contrary to Christian faith and love.
Nevertheless, he did not incite violence and called for peaceful methods and reconciliation, and issued an appeal to the Northern Hemisphere to lighten the debt burden that was making the situation of poor countries ever more dramatic. Less than a month later, John Paul II was travelling again. For 10 days at the beginning of June, he visited the lands of Vikings and Lapps, of fields and lakes, of forests and of deep silence, to see Norway, Iceland, Finland, Denmark and Sweden. For John Paul II, the first pope to travel through the northern countries and even into the Arctic Circle with its midnight sun, this was primarily a journey into post-Christian society. It was his most unusual journey, in the sense that even if all the Catholics of the 5 countries had been brought together, they could not have filled St. Peter's Square. But it was also a difficult and delicate visit, because in these lands, which for centuries have been dominated without opposition by the Lutheran Reform, Catholicism is regarded as foreign, and the Pope is seen as a despotic and authoritarian Antichrist. The visit confirmed this attitude, with many Lutheran bishops displaying ostentatious coldness, including the Bishop of Oslo, who reminded his guest of the Galileo issue, and the Bishop of Roskilde in Denmark, who would not allow the Pope to speak in his cathedral. Public opinion, at least as reflected by the newspapers, proved to be more favourable to Wojtyła, compared with the attitude of the official Danish Church, for example. 1-0 for the Pope. This was the favourable comment on his presence made by a Copenhagen newspaper in reply to hardline Protestants who had decided to gag the Pope by preventing him from speaking. In Finland, however, Archbishop Wikström marked the prayer meeting with an unusual invitation to lunch, together with his wife Birgitta. The two of them sat on either side of their guest. The northern journey made by John Paul II aroused a sort of Copernican revolution among many Lutherans. They had expected the Pope to be a conservative, locked in an ivory tower of his own infallibility, or rigid in his own moral strictness. For 10 days, they were surprised to find themselves facing a Bishop of Rome who held out his hand to ill-mannered Lutheran prelates and sought forgiveness for Catholic misdeeds of the past. In order to reach Santiago de Compostela on the 19th of August for the World Youth Meeting, the Pope took up his walking stick, indeed his pilgrim's staff, and wore the brown shoulder cape decorated with 2 shells on the chest. He thus symbolically joined the millions of European pilgrims who for 11 centuries have followed the path to Santiago, and joined the vast stream of young people, almost 400,000 of them, who had responded to his convocation to Galicia for an immersion in Christianity. He was present at the spectacular launching of the Bota Fumero, the enormous 55-kilogram incense burner which is raised by 8 people, swinging from side to side as it climbs almost to the ceiling of the transept. The pilgrimage was not made in the spirit of the Iberian reconquest, with the Moors as the enemy, but was intended as a shared journey through poverty and the misadventures of life. In line with these hopes, the Pope told the enthusiastic young people who crowded Mount de Gozo, the mountain of joy in the outskirts of Santiago,
Now at the threshold of the year 2000, the Church wishes to continue to be humanity's travelling companion. Our humanity, which is sometimes afflicted by a sense of pain and abandonment because of numerous betrayals, still needs to be guided towards salvation through the dense fog that looms before us when the conscience of the common Christian calling becomes weaker, even among the faithful.
His 5th Asian journey, conducted in October, made advanced headlines because of its flight plan, which for the first time took the papal aircraft across the USSR and Taiwan, while China refused permission. His itinerary covered 39,000 kilometers in 10 days, traveling to Seoul in Korea for the closing of the International Eucharist Congress, and to Indonesia and the islands of Mauritius. One of the main issues was the intricate situation in East Timor, the former Portuguese colony that had been occupied and annexed by Indonesia in 1975. The Vatican had never recognized this annexation. The sensitivity of the visit was symbolized by the issue of whether he should kiss the earth. Had he done so on reaching the airport of Dili, the Pope would symbolically have recognized its independence, while avoiding the gesture would have supported East Timor's absorption as the 27th Indonesian province. In the end, the following compromise was devised. As he came to the altar, set up in a vast flat area near the sea, the Pope kissed the cross, which was placed on the ground. The crowd understood and applauded. The visit made by Robert Runcie, Archbishop of Canterbury and Primate of the Anglican Communion from the 29th September to the 2nd of October, was the ecumenical event of the year. After 2 decades of theological dialogue, no one could deny that the relationship between the 2 churches was stalled on the issue of the admission of women to the priesthood in some provinces of the Anglican community. But the situation worsened when the Church of England itself opened its doors to women priests. The Vespers, sung by Runcie and by the Pope at San Gregorio al Cielo, were rich in emotion and historical overtones. It was from this point that several monks had set out 1,400 years before to evangelize England, dispatched by Pope Gregory the Great. They were led by Augustine, the first Bishop of Canterbury. Months later, when he sang the Te Deum of thanks for 1989 in the Roman Church of Jesus, Pope Wojtyla was reminded of the Te Deum that had been sung 2 days earlier by 90-year-old Cardinal Tomaszek in Prague Cathedral, in the presence of newly elected President Václav Havel. That Te Deum symbolically brought to an end the year of 1989 and more than 4 decades of communist power in many Eastern nations.
呢一套片對大家有啲咩啟示呢？實際上呢一套片呢有2個主題，一個就係東歐變革，另外一個呢就係戰爭嘅威脅。1989年嘅東歐變革呢，可以講話風起雲湧，係非常之激盪人心。 柏林圍牆嘅倒冧咧，最終係導致到連串嘅東歐政權嘅崩潰。到1991年咧就水到渠成。嗱，好多人咧以為咧呢個新世界從此開始啦，但係事實上喺1989年嘅時候咧，教宗若望保祿二世咧亦都係表達咗對人類前途嘅憂慮。佢憂慮嘅係黎巴嫩嘅戰爭、東帝汶嘅嗰個戰爭。今日呢兩個地方、兩個國家咧已經唔會再遭受到戰爭嘅威脅。但係戰爭喺人類歷史上邊係咪從此就消失咗呢？當然唔係。事實上，人雖然成日講話係萬物之靈，但係人呢經常不斷自相殘殺。嗱，呢一個問題呢，我哋喺過去10幾年裏邊，由1989年之後呢，我哋仲有連串嘅歷史經驗嘅。好多東歐國家喺佢哋獨立咗之後呢，馬上就陷入呢一個民族主義嘅矛盾。有啲國家呢就係分裂啦，有啲國家呢就係同鄰近嘅國家打仗啦。結果呢就係話令到嗰啲地區嘅人民呢，比起受到政治高壓嘅時候呢，係受到更加多嘅苦楚。其中最集中嘅例子呢，可以講話就係南斯拉夫。南斯拉夫咧擺脫咗蘇聯嘅威脅，冇咗共產黨嘅統治之後咧，馬上就分崩離析。然後整個90年代咧就出現咗塞爾維亞人屠殺波斯尼亞人、屠殺阿爾巴尼亞人嘅事件。嗱，呢一樣嘢咧好明顯咧，教宗若望保祿二世係感到非常之痛心。而以後嗰幾集咧，我哋都會睇到天主教會喺呢個問題上邊佢哋嘅立場係點樣樣。踏入1990年咧，東歐巨變嘅浪潮咧係進一步發展。大家都知道咧，喺1989年嘅年尾咧，柏林圍牆倒冧，象徵住咧就係東歐巨變嘅開始。咁喺1990年嘅時候咧，好多國家嘅人民咧希望咧就係進一步推翻共產黨嘅統治，佢哋希望修改憲法，嚟一次正式嘅選舉，然後咧就係建立一個真真正正嘅民主嘅體制。嗱，呢一連串嘅變化咧係嚟得好快嘅，而教宗咧亦都覺得非常之驚訝，竟然咧就係蘇聯東歐嘅崩潰咧嗰個速度咧係咁快。但係佢肯定咧就係教會喺推動東歐同埋蘇聯變革，同埋另一方面就係話推動嗰個自由化嗰方面咧係起到一個非常之重大嘅作用。嗱，我哋都知道咧就係教宗若望保祿二世咧，從來都係批判呢個不人道嘅社會主義制度。過去喺波蘭做大主教嘅時候係咁樣，佢做教宗之後咧亦都係一樣。而佢喺推動呢個東歐巨變嘅過程裏邊咧，可以講話係扮演一個即係舉足輕重嘅角色。但而家佢又提醒我哋，就係話有咗自由啦，係咪就係萬事大吉呢？佢話唔係，有咗自由之後呢，我哋都要繼續反省人類前途嘅嗰個發展方向。無論點到呢，1990年呢係象徵住東西對壘嘅結束。從此以後咧，就係東西方就唔再分成東西方，而係咧大家就朝住一個一體化嘅歐洲向前進。好啦，喺呢一年裏邊咧，教宗若望保祿二世咧再次接見戈爾巴喬夫。喺呢一次會面裏邊咧，佢完全肯定戈爾巴喬夫對東歐巨變所做嘅貢獻。同樣，教宗咧亦都訪問咗捷克，會見咗新當選嘅總統哈維爾。而哈維爾總統咧過去係一個好出名嘅異見分子，曾經咧就係被捷克共產黨咧係監禁過嘅。嗱，呢一年咧亦都象徵住梵蒂岡同埋一啲共產國家關係嘅恢復。烏克蘭咧其中有10位地下主教咧喺呢一年咧就獲准正式訪問梵蒂岡，同埋咧佢哋有機會咧同一啲國外嘅烏克蘭主教會面。嗱，呢個象徵咧烏克蘭咧就係喺呢個問題上邊，即係話喺宗教自由嗰方面咧係邁出咗好重要嘅一步。因為過去呢啲地下主教咧就唔可能令到即係唔可能咧就係俾共產黨知道佢哋嘅存在。同樣道理喺越南亦都係一樣。越南雖然係一個社會主義國家，但係喺1990年咧亦都容許佢哋嘅21個主教咧訪問梵蒂岡，得到呢個教宗嘅祝福。呢個標誌住咧就係越南同埋梵蒂岡關係嘅正常化。但係喺佢裏邊咧亦都提到，就係話其實梵蒂岡亦都希望同樣嘅正常化咧能夠同中國發生，但係咧當然咧呢個問題咧就冇辦法喺短時間裏邊咧解決。喺1990年咧，教宗最關心嘅另外一個問題咧，我相信唔使我講大家都知啊，就係波斯灣戰爭馬上要爆發。喺嗰一年嘅夏天， 伊拉克咧喺侯賽因嘅領導底下咧就侵佔咗科威特，然後為咗即係恢復科威特呢一個國家咧，美國咧就係挺身而出喺聯合國裏邊咧就通過連串嘅議案，希望咧最終咧伊拉克咧就離開科威特。嗱，呢個戰爭雖然喺90年咧就仲未爆發，但係已經係迫在眉睫。教宗唔希望睇到戰爭，佢希望人與人之間同埋國與國之間能夠達至諒解同埋和平。喺呢一套片裏邊咧，仲有2點係值得攞出嚟講一講嘅。第一點咧就係、其實喺以後嘅百年通諭嗰度，教宗亦都提到過嘅，就係話而家社會主義馬上就要結束啦。但係呢一個咧並唔係象徵住資本主義嘅全面勝利。佢認為資本主義咧其實亦都存在住好多嘅問題。佢喺呢個時候咧亦都開始提出嚟啦。第二點咧就涉及意大利南部嘅罪惡活動。教宗喺訪問意大利南部嘅時候咧，特別對嗰3000個公務員咧提醒佢哋，意大利南部嘅非法罪案活動咧係非常之猖獗。咁呢個當然同當地嘅黑社會咧好有關係。佢特別提醒佢哋咧應該要好好地對付呢啲黑社會，從而促進社會嘅安寧同埋和諧。
Events were taking on the proportions of a real upheaval, and John Paul II was unable to contain his astonishment over the developments of 1989. Even he, who had been their patient moral instigator, was unable to imagine that the evil empire, as the system of atheist regimes was called, could collapse into ruins. The Pope gave his first assessment of this unexpected upheaval to 118 ambassadors accredited to the Vatican for the traditional New Year audience. His sense of wonder, emotion, and thankfulness to Providence are well reflected in a speech that in parts became almost poetic.
The unquenchable thirst for liberty manifested by different peoples has accelerated the evolution of events, brought down the walls and opened the doors. Events are taking on the proportions of a real upheaval. As you will undoubtedly have noted, the starting point or the meeting point has often been a church.
In words charged with emotion, the Pope praised the peaceful uprising of peoples who had undertaken that pilgrimage towards freedom, without, however, forgetting the politicians who made it possible, giving implicit recognition of Gorbachev's role. In the early months of 1990, the Pope, who had come from a communist bloc country, often confronted the self-styled political scientific systems and revolutionary myths with the historic consequences of their tragic utopian ideas that had failed so miserably. He made a tough indictment of communism, which he labeled as inhuman totalitarianism during the audience that he held at the Papal Council for Culture. But even in this case, his condemnation was combined with a call for prudence, wise meditation, and bold planning for the new balance that was emerging between East and West and North and South. The year 1990 marked the completion of the Vatican's Eastern policy and its full emergence on the major international stage. Its diplomatic activities, which might in the past have seemed elitist and marginal, became a major element in its pastoral design following the events of 1989. Its international political choices revolved around peace and the development of peoples, taking the Second Vatican Council as its point of reference with a fresh expression of the mystery of the Church and of its mission in the world. Throughout the year, the Vatican kept its focus on Moscow and openly supported Gorbachev's perestroika policy, even when the crisis broke out in Lithuania, the only Soviet republic with a Catholic majority. While flying from Rome to the island of Capo Verde on the 25th of January, John Paul II revealed that during the historic audience of the 1st of December 1989, Gorbachev had asked him to pray for perestroika. For the whole year, the Vatican maintained this focus, not without trepidation, hoping for a positive outcome of the Kremlin leader's policy. It was truly extraordinary, as a sign of the times. Even a year earlier, no one could ever have imagined such a change, that the Vatican would be working for the success of the Kremlin's policy. The audience with Gorbachev on the 18th of November at the Vatican did not have the same historical impact as the first one, but concluded in mutual satisfaction, with a highly positive year as regards official links between the USSR and the Vatican, opening the way for a third meeting which all thought it fitting to hold at the Kremlin, in the context of a papal visit to Moscow. However, this hope remained unfulfilled because the USSR came to an end, and because of the opposition of the Orthodox Patriarch of Moscow. The attention the Pope gave to the events of 1989 and 1990 was not just a matter of diplomatic, political assessment, but in keeping with John Paul II's outlook, was always transformed into prayer. From the highest peak of the continent, the Pope blessed and prayed for a free and united Europe. The Pope and the peoples of Europe were able to experience the full force of change even through their emotions, and no event of the year proved better for this than the high-profile two-day visit that he made to Czechoslovakia on the 21st and 22nd of April. The scene was Prague, where the communist regime had been most narrow-minded and harsh, when 20 years earlier the hopes of socialism with a human face had been crushed by Soviet tanks. Václav Havel, the dissident playwright who had often been imprisoned by the communist regime and who was now the first president of reborn Czechoslovakia, just 5 months after the timely Velvet Revolution, expressed the feelings of his countrymen well when he greeted the Slavic Pope at the airport. At his side was the 90-year-old Cardinal František Tomášek, symbol of the resistance of the Czech Church. The nightmare was over. The castle was open, and the Bishop of Rome made this announcement from Prague Castle, speaking to intellectuals.
In a certain sense, Czechoslovakia is today returning to Europe. It has a precise role and an important mission as a spiritual crossroads in the continent, a bridge between West and East.
Prague gave its guest a triumphant welcome, with more than 1 million people participating in the communion service at Lietna Park, which had been the scene of mass gatherings against the regime the previous November. Even those who were not Catholics applauded him as an architect of the new Europe. Never before, as in these early months of 1990, had a pope found himself acting as guide for so many people in search of liberty, following a plan of Christian humanism. Never as now had a pope preached at the spiritual crossroads of Europe. Freedom brought the opportunity for the Vatican to fill bishops' posts in the former Soviet bloc that had been vacant for years, and enabled national bishops to speak out and resume their work. The most significant event of this rebirth of Eastern European episcopacies was the meeting in Rome from 25th to 26th June in the presence of the Pope of 10 Ukrainian bishops who had been undercover in their country for many years, and 18 of their colleagues who had emigrated. As for Catholic communities still under communist regimes, 1990 marked a crack in the ice of relations with Vietnam. For the first time since the outbreak of the war between North and South, the Hanoi government permitted a collegial visit to the Pope by 21 bishops belonging to the Episcopal Conference. There was, however, no such change in links with Communist China, which again made accusations against the Vatican and persecuted Catholics faithful to the Pope, bringing back repressive measures that had been in force for 40 years but had been applied less often in recent times. On August the 6th, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. The strong threats of armed intervention made by certain countries, led by the USA, under the aegis of the United Nations, forced the Pope to describe the situation in the Persian Gulf on the 26th of August, only 3 weeks after the invasion, as truly worrying.
Giorno del Signore, sento anche il dovere di invitarvi a pregare per la pace nel Golfo Persico, dove ultimamente si è venuta a creare una situazione veramente preoccupante. In realtà siamo stati testimoni di gravi violazioni del diritto internazionale, della Carta dell'Organizzazione delle Nazioni Unite, come dei principi di etica che devono presiedere alla convivenza tra i popoli. La diffidenza degli uni verso gli altri va drammaticamente aumentando e l'ordine internazionale, edificato a prezzo di tanti sforzi e del sacrificio di tante vite umane, è gravemente minacciato.
At Christmas, speaking to a vast audience in an address televised worldwide and using words that record those of Pius XII in 1939, John Paul II shouted,
La luce di Cristo è con le nazioni tormentate del Medio Oriente. Per l'area del Golfo trepidanti aspettiamo il dilegarsi della minaccia delle armi. Si persuadano i responsabili che la guerra è avventura senza ritorno, con la ragione, con la pazienza, con il dialogo, nel rispetto dei diritti inalienabili dei popoli, delle genti, è possibile individuare e percorrere le strade dell'intesa e della pace.
The Pope, who had helped to bring down the Berlin Wall, was now back in his more customary role as the unheeded prophet of peace. Just as John Paul II remained unheeded in his denunciations, his appeals, his pleas and condemnations on behalf of Africa. 9 months later, John Paul II resumed these entreaties, this time from Central Africa. In Mwanza, in Tanzania, he proved disheartened and pessimistic about the failure of the development of African peoples that had been expected to accompany their emergence from colonialism.
When they obtained independence, many developing countries were optimistic about the future, only to discover that their hopes of development today seem very far from being realized.
That failure is obvious, the Pope added, in the dramatic effort to break the indifference of the West. It was therefore with some embarrassment that John Paul II inaugurated the Church of St. Peter of the Savannah, a vast basilica that had cost more than 200 billion lira. A personal gift of the president and father figure of the Ivory Coast, Félix Houphouët-Boigny. The Pope's second journey to Mexico, which he made in May, following his first in January 1979, will have its place in history not so much because it brought to an end the strange situation of state opposition to the clergy, contrasting with the Catholic faith of 95% of Mexicans, but rather because of the lesson in economics that the Pope gave to Mexican businessmen in Durango. His address offered a foretaste of the central theme of the Centésimos Annus. The collapse of real socialism does not mean the victory and validity of capitalist systems. In the grandiose Ricardo Castro Theatre in the center of Durango, the Pope spoke not just to Mexican businessmen, but to the whole of Latin America.
The events of recent history have sometimes been interpreted in a superficial way, as the triumph or failure of one system in relation to another. In other words, as the triumph of the free capitalist system.
Of the 6 pastoral visits carried out by the Pope in 1990, the one he made to Naples and Campania in November deserves recognition as one of the most important and richest in teachings that he has ever conducted in Italy, because of the wide range of subjects and the severity of the papal warnings. During an unprecedented meeting in the capital of the South with 3,000 civil servants in the great Aeritalia hangar at Capo di Monte, the Pope issued his most drastic denunciation.
Sono motivo di grave preoccupazione gli attentati alla sicurezza delle persone, alla vita delle comunità internare in cui si sono radicate e si espandono le organizzazioni criminali che, come la Camorra, trovano in questo territorio un campo fertile. La non infrequente violazione dei principi che dovrebbero informare le relazioni sociali, la prevalenza di particolarismi, l'illegalità diffusa.
The target of his accusation was the excessive role of politics that often profoundly disrupt social life. On the 1st of December 1990, yet another 1st of December following the 1989 audience with Gorbachev, John Paul II turned an important page in his period in office. 76-year-old Cardinal Agostino Casaroli had stepped down as Secretary of State after 11 years in office, having exceeded the age limit. The Pope replaced him with 63-year-old Archbishop Angelo Sodano from Asti, who had been Secretary of the Department of Relations between the Vatican and other states since July 1988. Thus ended Casaroli's diplomatic era, marked by the Vatican's Eastern policy, and a new policy began based on continuity but with some change. The continuity lay in the facts, as Sodano had been Casaroli's pupil, while the change was implicit in their different characters and backgrounds. The most important ecclesiastical event of 1990 was the 8th Ordinary General Assembly of the Bishops' Synod, dealing with the training of priests in current circumstances. After listening for a month, the Pope intervened during the concluding meeting to set the principles on the main subjects that had been discussed by the 230 Synod Fathers as regards training of priests. He did not forget to criticize some of the mass media for supporting and assisting the systematic propaganda that is hostile to the celibacy of priests. There were numerous minor events during this 13th year of his term in office. One significant theme among many was Karol Wojtyła's attitude to sport. He did not pass up opportunities to kick a football and to call himself a sportsman. This happened on the 9th of June, the inaugural day of the 1990 World Cup in Italy, while he was visiting the Roman parish of Colle Verde. While meeting young people, the Pope revealed that his aides had reminded him that the World Cup opening match was about to begin, and commented with a smile,
The Pope should not even attempt to compete with this national duty to be in front of the television. I now wish you farewell to avoid clashing with Italian football.
In his love of nature and of physical exercise, Karol Wojtyła shows that he is in touch with the modern way of life, and that he is a normal human being, as well as universal pastor of the Church.
睇完呢套片之後呢，我哋發覺到踏入1990年呢，東歐巨變已經開始有啲初步嘅成果。其中最重要嘅就係人民開始享受到自由，而自由裏邊呢，當然以宗教自由呢，對東歐人嚟講呢係非常之重要嘅。本來好多地下教會呢，而家唔再匿埋喺地下啦，而家可以出嚟啦。可以講話呢，天主教會嘅活動呢，喺呢啲國家裏邊呢，係開始正常化啦。喺片裏邊呢，提到烏克蘭有10個地下主教，而家呢10個地下主教呢，竟然可以去到梵蒂岡同埋幾個國外嘅主教會面。呢個象徵住呢烏克蘭同梵蒂岡嘅關係正常化。同樣，越南係一個共產黨統治嘅國家，但係佢亦都容許佢哋有一個主教呢訪問梵蒂岡。換句話講呢，就係天主教會喺越南嘅境況呢，顯然呢係比1990年之前呢就會係好好多啦。從呢一套戲亦都可以睇到呢，教宗對資本主義社會嘅發展呢係非常之關心嘅。佢唔認為資本主義社會呢就係萬事大吉。實際上冇錯，每人喺資本主義社會裏邊呢有好多自由，但係由於不平等、不公義嘅事情呢依然係存在，所以呢佢對資本主義社會呢依然係持住一個批判嘅態度。資本主義基本上係一個國際嘅體系。如果我哋將全世界作為一個整體嚟睇呢，我哋會發覺到就係國與國之間嘅貧富懸殊，譬如話歐美國家同埋非洲國家之間嘅嗰個巨大嘅差距呢，實際上都係資本主義社會所造成嘅。所以教宗認為呢，我哋應該多啲幫助貧窮國家。佢訪問坦桑尼亞，佢亦都希望呢就係好多嗰啲富有國家呢能夠減輕呢啲貧窮國家嘅債務負擔。同樣喺一個國家裏邊呢，資本主義社會亦都造成好多嘅不平等、罪惡嘅活動或者社會嘅不公正。所以佢喺訪問意大利南部嘅時候呢，就特別提到呢一樣嘢。 所以而家冇錯，東歐巨變係為好多人咧帶嚟自由，但係並非從此就係萬事大吉，呢個世界就會好美妙。教宗提醒大家咧就係話，如果我哋要一個美好嘅前途咧，我哋需要咧就係進一步嘅努力。1991年呢係以戰爭開始，亦都以戰爭結束。91年年初咧有波斯灣嘅戰爭，91年年尾咧有克羅地亞嘅戰爭。而對主張寬容、諒解、自由同埋和平嘅天主教徒嚟講咧，戰爭自然唔係一件好事。所以91年咧係戰爭年，不斷咧係令到教宗若望保祿二世咧感到咧灰心如焚。睇翻1991年年初嘅戰爭咧，係喺短短嘅幾日裏邊咧就解決，但係成件事情咧係延續咗超過半年嘅時間。早喺90年嘅8月，伊拉克咧就侵佔咗科威特。經過幾個月嘅拉鋸，伊拉克咧都唔願意撤出科威特。卒之咧就係話喺美國領導底下，率領咗英國、法國以及其他中東國家嘅部隊咧進入伊拉克，然後咧全面解放咗科威特。科威特人咧恢復咗自由，但係畢竟咧就喺嗰個地區裏邊咧係種下一個不穩嘅種子。到咗91年，南斯拉夫呢一個國家分崩離析，好多加盟共和國咧都要求獨立，其中亦都包括克羅地亞。所以到咗年尾咧，亦都掀起呢一個克羅地亞嘅戰爭。所以由年頭到年尾咧，教宗都感到非常之沮喪，因為年頭有波斯灣戰爭，年尾有南斯拉夫嘅戰爭。咁當然天主教會係希望做一啲嘢嘅，譬如話喺戲裏邊曾經提到，佢係邀請西方各國主要大國嘅主教咧，係開咗一次中東問題嘅會議。一方面咧，希望咧就係就住波斯灣戰爭咧，各個國家嘅主教咧喺本國範圍裏邊做一啲事情。另一方面咧，亦都希望咧就係話承認巴勒斯坦人同埋黎巴嫩人佢哋獨立自主嘅訴求。喺1991年，教宗關心嘅另外一個重要嘅問題咧，就係資本主義社會存在住嘅種種弊端。佢喺呢一年裏邊咧係非常之側重提及到資本主義社會存在住嘅問題。我哋知道咧，教宗咧係非常之關心民間疾苦嘅。佢希望見到一個社會係冇剝削、冇歧視，亦都希望咧呢一個社會咧係能夠促進人類嘅創造性。但係資本主義社會存在住嘅問題咧，係令佢非常之警惕同埋非常之關心嘅。佢喺呢一年裏邊咧，曾經訪問過波蘭，亦都訪問過巴西。波蘭嗰陣時咧已經係擺脫咗共產黨嘅統治，就由以前嘅團結工會領袖華里沙執政。可以講話波蘭已經係恢復自由。但喺呢一個自由嘅波蘭裏邊咧，教宗咧馬上提醒波蘭人民，叫佢哋唔好陷於消費主義同埋享樂主義，唔好咧淨係斤斤計較於呢個急功近利或者係窮奢極侈。喺巴西訪問嘅時候咧，佢更加批判資本主義社會存在住嘅黑暗同埋違反人性嘅行為。佢對於經濟壟斷啊，對於貧富懸殊啊，對於富有國同埋貧窮國家之間嘅嗰種咁嘅剝削嘅關係啊，係感到非常之不滿。佢喺巴西咧特別批判2個問題。第一個問題咧就涉及到巴西嘅熱帶雨林咧係大量被破壞，佢係非常之反感嘅。另一個問題咧就係對青少年嘅忽視，因為巴西咧有好多無家可歸嘅青少年，佢哋係自生自滅。嗱，呢一樣嘢咧就令到教宗對於資本主義社會嘅黑暗咧係尤其係關注。咁所以喺1991年提出嘅百年通諭裏邊咧，佢除咗強調指出社會主義崩潰嘅原因之外咧，佢更加警惕世界各國嘅人民一定要留意住資本主義社會存在住嘅種種弊端。
On the morning of the 1st of January, as all humanity held its breath waiting for the possible outbreak of a war with unforeseeable consequences, the Pope made an address to the world.
Che il 1991 sia per tutti un anno di pace e non di guerra.
As if anxious to give the year a positive augury from the outset, he hastened to proclaim it the year of the Church's social doctrine, announcing the publication of a commemorative encyclical. His intention was to take the existing doctrine and update it in the light of the new issues of our times. The hopes of John Paul II ended, however, in utter disappointment. The prophet, armed only with the word of God and with his own awareness of being the spokesman of the hopes of humanity as a whole, gradually saw all his efforts fail. 12 months later, he was bitterly obliged to describe 1991 in the worst possible terms as a year of wars. The following January, presenting his summary to the accredited ambassadors, he pointed out that 1991 had begun and ended to the roar of guns, from the Gulf War with its aftermath of death, destruction and unresolved problems, to the struggles in Yugoslavia and especially in Croatia. Throughout the month of January, the Pope struggled to halt the war machine, using appeals and gestures, reflecting his fruitless efforts on behalf of the Lebanon in previous years. The same approach was soon to be tried again on behalf of Croatia. Up to the 15th of January, the Pope worked to prevent the outbreak of the Gulf War, and after that date to bring it to an end as quickly as possible. In a message to European Community foreign ministers meeting in Luxembourg on the 4th of January, the Pope reminded them of their paramount duty to uphold international law. An ability to suffer with peoples, to participate personally in their tragedies, is characteristic of Pope Wojtyla. In the Angelus of the 24th of February, after more than a month of war, he proved bitter and disappointed, with a tone of voice that revealed the frustration of an unheeded, impotent prophet.
Come in queste ore la guerra appare come germe di morte, mai come in questi giorni l'uomo è stato chiamato a far prevalere la ragione sulle passioni. Mai come oggi i responsabili delle nazioni, servitori del bene comune, sono interpellati dalla propria coscienza. Da parte sua, questa sede apostolica ha fatto quanto era nelle sue possibilità per evitare questa terribile guerra.
On the 4th of March, a few days after the cessation of hostilities, the Pope, in an exceptional initiative, called a meeting in Rome of the 7 Western Patriarchs and the representatives of the episcopacies of countries that had directly participated in the Gulf War. They included bishops from the United States, Britain, France, Italy, Belgium and the Council of European Episcopacies. Some described this as the first international conference on the Middle East. It concluded with a request to leaders of the international community to make an immediate start on a solution to all the problems of the Middle East. This should begin with the problem of the Palestinians, whose dignity should finally be recognized, and with the issue of Lebanon, a sovereign country shorn of its full independence in defiance of international order. The request did not overlook those peoples who live in tension because of situations that are unresolved or perhaps forgotten, such as the Cypriots and the Kurds. The echo of the deadly bombing of Baghdad had barely stopped, and only a few months had passed since the United States and its allies had with a heavy hand forced Saddam to retreat from Kuwait. But they had not forced him to step down from power as they had hoped, and now a further tragedy was keeping the Vatican lights burning late into the night, prompting the Pope to repeat his marathon of pleas, appeals, warnings and condemnations. This was the crisis in former Yugoslavia, with the invasion of Croatia, which like Slovenia had declared itself independent from the Federation. A day of prayer for peace in former Yugoslavia was celebrated on the 8th of September, and was an opportunity to remind Belgrade of the solemn undertakings made in Helsinki and in Paris, accompanied by the sad refrain that war does not resolve problems. On the contrary, it leads to new and worse ones. The first Special Synod for Europe was undoubtedly the most important ecclesiastical event of 1991, producing a pastoral summary of events taking place in the centre-east of the continent. To mark the centenary of the Rerum Novarum, John Paul II held that the best way to commemorate the occasion was to demonstrate its effectiveness. On the 1st of May, 2 weeks before the anniversary on the 15th, he promulgated the Centesimus Annus, which was put forward as a development and implementation of Pope Leo's encyclical, providing an interpretation of new matters of our times in the light of the great principles set by Pope Leo XIII and developed by his successors. After highlighting the significance of the crisis of Marxism, the Pope went on to point out that capitalism too had its limits as a model for economic organization.
Capitalism is victorious and may be advocated if one recognizes the fundamental positive role of free enterprise, of the market, of private property, and of the resulting responsibility for the means of production as regards free human creativity in the economic sector.
If indeed the modern enterprise economy has positive aspects, one cannot but condemn the risks of people being exploited and excluded. The Church has no economic models to offer that gives a reminder that the economy must serve the overall development of the individual. 3 of the 4 papal journeys outside Italy during that year were linked to the European events that had begun in 1989. The Polish Pope's new pilgrimage to the shrine of Fatima, preceded by stops in the Atlantic islands of Madeira and the Azores, was undertaken to give thanks to the Virgin for answering his prayers for reinstatement of the freedom of the peoples of Eastern Europe, as well as renewed thanks on the 10th anniversary of his survival of the assassination attempt. His 4th visit to Poland in June was the first that Wojtyła had made in the liberated country, but was burdened by old and new problems. His World Youth Meeting in Częstochowa was the first of its kind, attended by tens of thousands of Soviet bloc youngsters who were now free to travel and to meet people of their own age from the West. The Black Madonna of Jasna Góra produced the great miracle of liberation from communist rule before the Pope visited post-communist Hungary. As well as these events, the Pope carried out his 2nd journey to Brazil in October. Arriving in Lisbon on the 10th of May, John Paul II gave a hopeful interpretation of the tormented history of these months, using the same words that St. Augustine had spoken when faced with the upheavals of his own time caused by the barbaric invasions and by the collapse of the Roman Empire.
This is not an old world that is coming to an end, it is a new world that is beginning. A new dawn seems to be appearing in the skies of history, calling upon Christians to be the light and the salt of a world that has great need of Christ, the salvation of man. I have come to Portugal to visit Fatima for the 2nd time, to thank the Madonna for the protection she has given the Church during these years that have marked a rapid and deep social transformation, offering new hope for the many peoples oppressed by atheist ideologies that hinder the practice of faith.
By the time the Pope made his 4th visit to Poland, the country was at last free and sovereign, and its symbol was appropriately Lech Wałęsa, the new President of the Republic. In the space of 9 days, the Pope visited 12 places and did not hide his concern that many of his countrymen were pursuing wealth too relentlessly. Like a new Moses, he explained the 10 Commandments to his people at the various stops, warning them against the idols of consumerism and of false freedom, and especially against violating the sacredness of human life through abortion. For the 2nd time, the Pope of the Centesimus Annus occupied himself with the ailments of the vast patient that is Brazil, visiting the destitute areas of the northeast and of Mato Grosso for 9 days. He denounced capitalism's perverse mechanisms, which through the selfishness and economic domination of the rich widened the poverty gap in developing countries. Using strong words so that his energetic attack would be heard throughout the world, John Paul II hit out at the foreign debt that could never be repaid, except at the price of hunger and destitution among the people. He made this attack immediately during the 1st stage in Natal in the northeast, repeating it everywhere he went, from Cuiabá to the edge of Amazonia, emphasizing the tragedy of the genocide of the Indians and the ecological disaster of the rainforest, even denouncing the Brazilian government, which did not defend the forest against indiscriminate exploitation by the big companies. Here the Pope brought up a sad litany of problems, highlighting all the afflictions of Brazilian children, including the most tragic of these, their extermination.
There cannot and must not be abandoned children or children without families, nor young boys or girls living in the streets. This cannot and must not happen, and the Pope asks and demands this in the name of God and of his Son, who was once a child.
In April, John Paul II consulted all the cardinals, including those over 80 who no longer had a vote, to discuss problems of great importance to the mission of the Church and for the dignity of mankind. These included the defense of human life against abortion, euthanasia, artificial insemination and contraception, and defense against the aggressiveness of the sects, which had taken between 25 and 40 million of the faithful from the Church. The convocation of the Church Senate has been one of the most original and successful initiatives of his period in office. This fourth extraordinary consistory, following those of 1979, 1982 and 1985, began with a ringing denunciation issued by the first speaker, Cardinal Ratzinger. Every year, between 40 and 50 million human lives in the world were snuffed out by abortion, without taking account of the hidden victims of the birth pill and other contraceptives. Faced with this mass slaughter, this real war against human life, the cardinals asked the Pope for a document on the inalienable sacredness of human life and on the abuses and attacks that threaten it. Following Ratzinger's suggestions, they denounced the worrying regression and reversal of moral sensitivity, as a result of which an unconscious passage has been made from silence in the face of evil that is legally permitted to approval of it. The Pope's ministry in Italy was completed for the year with numerous pastoral visits to our regions. Even his brief stay in Val d'Aosta was an opportunity for pastoral visits to Susa and for a Mass at the foot of the Matterhorn. The visit to Camerino, Fabriano and Matelica in the Marche region on the occasion of the Feast of St. Joseph was used for a field celebration of 100 years of the Church's social doctrine, in an area where industrialization had taken place without harming the environment and in a human way. The visit to the Italian region of Basilicata at the end of April, a few days after the publication of the Centesimus Annus, also focused on human labor and on the great importance of work in an area of high unemployment. An answer was needed for the new and old forms of poverty that were encountered on the streets of Rome. The Pope's call for that answer, which he issued from the Roman parish of Santa Dorotea, sums up one of the main pastoral concerns of this 13th year of Pope Wojtyła's term as the city's bishop. The exclusion of immigrants from society was the social problem that worried him most. One morning in September, he received 100 Romany gypsies, some wearing traditional costumes and carrying guitars, in a room of the consistory. "You represent," the Pope told them, "a minority that has no territorial limits and which has always rejected armed struggle as a means of achieving your aims." His Christmas pastoral visit was made to patients at the Sandro Pertini Hospital, where one of the patients reminded him of the 77 days he had spent in Gemelli Hospital following the attempt on his life. John Paul II replied, "The Pope too has had the blessing of being seriously ill." He did not know that he was to return to Gemelli Hospital a further 4 times in the space of 5 years. Ancient Rome had an irresistible fascination for the Polish Pope, who crossed it as if conducting a pilgrimage in the footsteps of the multitude of saints when he visited parishes, mainly in the historical center. The Pope is both a pilgrim in Rome and a flying pilgrim on a world mission. By now, his relationship with the aircraft cabin staff was one of informality and gratitude, and he had an opportunity to show this in an official way during the visit he made to Fiumicino Airport, the home of Alitalia, on the day of the Feast of the Madonna of Loreto, protector of aviation and of flyers. In 13 years of intense work, John Paul II had already covered more than 832,000 kilometers in 53 overseas journeys to 100 different countries, as well as more than 100 visits to Italy. Again in 1991, the Pope of the Redemptoris Missio had again confirmed his choice of the entire world as the horizons of his ministry, and the fact that he truly felt himself to be a successor of Peter and Paul, the two itinerant apostles.
喺之前呢，我哋提到91年嘅百年通諭。喺百年通諭裏邊呢，教宗若望保祿二世呢，當然表達佢對社會主義嘅深惡痛絕。但係另一方面呢，我哋都好知道佢對資本主義呢冇乜好感嘅。佢對資本主義帶嚟嘅貧窮啊、剝削啊、或者係歧視啊，亦都同樣係深惡痛絕。其實呢一樣嘢對佢嚟講並唔係新鮮嘅。事實上喺50年代、60年代嘅時候呢，當佢係反對緊共產黨統治嘅時候呢，同時亦都表示呢，就係話對資本主義社會嗰一套呢，我哋應該提高警惕。所以喺呢套片裏邊呢，佢特別提到就係話我哋要幫助弱小，幫助嗰啲被剝削或者係窮困嘅人。喺戲裏邊有一段呢，就係佢招待嗰啲吉普賽人。吉普賽人喺歐洲呢，被視作為最弱小、最無助嘅一個族群。佢哋係最窮困嘅，喺世界各國呢，都係受到歧視嘅。為咗幫助窮人，為咗幫助少數族裔呢，天主教會呢，希望亦都係承諾呢，喺呢一方面呢，會多做工作。除咗呢一點之外，即係話對資本主義社會我哋應該表示關心之外呢，教宗喺呢一套片裏面呢，亦都表達咗就係佢係好急切要去喺呢一個社會急劇轉變嘅過程裏邊呢，睇下究竟教會應該點樣回應種種嘅問題。嗱，呢啲問題咧，當然涉及到一啲教會過往嘅價值觀啦。譬如話墮胎、節育、同性戀，我哋應該點樣對待呢？嗱，喺呢個問題上邊咧，當然咧就係話天主教會並冇任何嘅突破，但係起碼可以睇到咧就係話面對社會急劇嘅轉變咧，佢哋都希望咧係重新審視、重新去睇返教會能夠喺呢啲社會問題上面扮演啲咩角色。嗱，最後一樣嘢，呢套片亦都好強調就係教宗喺過去13年不斷外訪，亦都咧就係話喺羅馬市裏邊咧係有好多牧民嘅探訪。嗱，呢一個咧就係承繼咗聖伯多祿同埋聖保祿宗徒嘅足跡。而事實上咧就係話1991年之後，直到現在咧，教宗雖然係越嚟越老啦，但係佢都咧希望咧就係話盡量喺呢一方面咧就做多啲工作，盡量咧就係擴大天主教會喺世界上面嘅影響。